Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, analysis of the Hindu newspaper from the perspective of UPSC examination. Today we are going to take up the Hindu newspaper dated 24th of March 2020, Delhi edition. The articles which we are going to discuss today are displayed on the screen. Let's now begin the discussion. Now we'll start today's discussion by understanding much talked about term which is flattening the curve, and this news appears on page number 14, where the signs are emerging that the exponential upwards curve in new COVID-19 infections in Germany is flattening off for the first time, and that is thanks to social distancing measures which the Germany has effectively implemented. Now what is this flattening of the curve? Now we will understand this flattening of the curve, which is basically a graph where on y-axis daily number of cases are plotted and on the x-axis time since the outbreak or the first infection which arrives in that country is plotted. And the whole idea is to reduce this peak by implementing social distancing. But before that, we will have a look at 3 or 4 countries and how coronavirus has spread in those countries with respect to time. Now this is the real graph which shows the total confirmed cases of COVID-19 on this axis Y and days since the total confirmed cases of COVID-19 reached 100, which is the very initial period of COVID-19. So first we will have a look at China where this virus emerged, and the graph for the China looks something like this, where you can see an initial spike in the number of infections reaching up to 75 to 80,000 and then it hits a plateau, which means that it has flattened after infecting around 80,000 people. But if you look at the curve of Japan, it already seems to achieving that plateau or flattening out just within 1,000 cases, which means that Japan has been able to curb the infection and it is towards flattening the curve. But one of the best responses have come from Taiwan and Singapore. You can see that despite being so globalized, they have managed to contain the infection below 500 level, which India has touched yesterday. So these are the two different responses. One is Italy and China, which have delayed their response against the coronavirus, and hence they have had a large morbidity as well as fatalities. Whereas in case of Singapore and Japan, initial active measures like social distancing and quarantines have led to very low number of cases. So we shall understand these two different responses with the help of the graph which you can see on this slide. The idea of slowing a virus spread so that fewer and fewer people need to seek treatment at any given time is known as flattening the curve. It explains why so many countries are implementing social distancing guidelines in the wake of coronavirus infections. Now, what is this curve? Now, this curve refers to the projected number of people who will eventually contract COVID-19 over a period of time. But you should keep in mind that this is a theoretical model. And this is not a hard prediction of how many people will actually get infected. Now, there are two shaded regions on the graph, one with the magenta or pink color, whereas another one with the yellow color. Now these two different curves shows the total number of people who are infected, which is the area under the curve. Now the curve takes on different shapes depending on the virus's infection rate. It could be very steep curve, which is the first case, which is the case with China and Italy, in which the virus spreads exponentially. It approximately keeps on doubling at a consistent rate, and the total number of cases skyrockets to its peak within few weeks. Now, after hitting this peak, the daily number of cases which are adding on start to reduce. It makes sense because, after all, at this stage, the virus has already infected so many people that almost all the population has started to develop the immunity against this virus, and hence there are less number of people to be infected with the virus, and hence the new cases which will be added to this number keeps on decreasing every day, which is what is happening with China. Now, the faster the infection curve rises, the quicker the local healthcare system gets overloaded beyond its capacity to treat people. As we are seeing in Italy, more and more new patients may be forced to go without ICU beds, and more hospitals may run out of basic supplies they need to respond to the outbreak. And hence, this idea of flattening the curve comes in. Because since you cannot cater to everyone, it is important to slow down this pace of increase of daily number of cases. So let's say that in India, the healthcare can take up only 10,000 cases every day, which means that we have only 10,000 beds in our ICU facilities. So if we don't take proper measures, what will happen? The cases will skyrocket and we won't be able to admit the critical cases into our ICUs, and all the cases over and above this line shall have to be treated without proper care, and hence the mortality rate will rise. So, as there is currently no vaccine or specific medication to treat COVID 19, and because testing is so limited in our country, the only way to flatten the curve is through collective action, which are self quarantine and social distancing. So, with these measures, what happens is that virus grows, but it grows at a very slow pace, and hence the number of people getting infected every day is very small as compared to the first case, where it rises exponentially. And hence the number of people reaching to the hospital is very less, and it never reaches the saturation level of our healthcare capacity, and hence we are able to take care of almost all the patients. There is an important takeaway from this graph as well, that although no precaution leads to higher mortality, but it leads to early peaking also, which means that the community spread of virus starts to recede at a very early period as compared to when social distancing is followed. But since the mortality rate is extremely higher in the first case, it is in the benefit of all of us to flatten the curve. Next news also deals with coronavirus outbreak, and it appears on page number 9. Now, ICMR has issued guidelines where it has asked asymptomatic healthcare workers involved in the care of suspected or confirmed cases of COVID 19 and asymptomatic household contacts of laboratory confirmed cases have been allowed to use drug hydrochloroquine. So, in this regard, we'll understand these two key terms, which are asymptomatic and prophylaxis. Why there is a delay in making vaccines for COVID 19 by understanding two key methods which are used to develop vaccine, and what is actually causing the delay as far as the vaccine for COVID 19 is concerned. Now, in medicine, a disease is considered asymptomatic if a patient is a carrier for the disease or infection but experiences no or at the least very minimal symptoms, and hence their potential to become a carrier increases manifold because they usually go undetected, and hence they are more dangerous. Now, there are reports which are now analyzing the data from China and Italy, and according to them, the geographical extent of COVID 19 has been drastically increased mainly because there were a lot of asymptomatic patients. And because they show no symptoms, they become an effective carrier because they pass the screening stage at airports and various other medical facilities. And hence there is a need for prophylaxis. Now, what does this term means? Now, prophylaxis means a treatment which is given or taken to prevent the onset of disease. So basically, it means that if you administer this medicine or vaccine to a person, then chances of that person of contracting that particular disease reduces manifold. And one such drug which has been prescribed by ICMR is hydrochloroquine. Now you should keep in mind that this is not the treatment for COVID 19. But various studies have found that hydrochloroquine reduces the chances of disease. But on the other hand, the world is still awaiting the arrival of COVID vaccines. And according to WHO, it may take anywhere around 18 months in minimum for an effective vaccine to arrive in the market. So, from the perspective of science and technology, it is important for us to understand how these vaccines are made. And then we will understand through this procedure that what is causing this delay. Now, the basic idea behind developing a vaccine is to generate or elicit an immune response from the body of a person. Now, it can be done in two ways. The one of the ways which have been utilized in making the vaccine so far has been that of using an original virus and identifying the main strain, which means that there are a lot of strains of a single disease. So you need to identify the main strain which is infecting the maximum number of people, and you need to attenuate or weaken them so that they actually don't cause the disease once they are injected into a person's body. And then that weakened virus is injected, from which body generates immune response in the form of secreting antibodies in the blood and immune system, and hence that person permanently becomes resistant to that disease. Now, this is an old technique. Now, the new technique is known as plug and play model, where the currently available technologies allow us to identify the genetic code of a virus. Then, researchers study that genetic code and try to find out what are the proteins which are secreted by that virus which actually cause the disease. And those sequences in the genetic code are knocked off, and remaining portion is taken off and attached to a harmless virus which does not cause any disease. What this does is that when this harmless virus is injected in a person's body starts to develop the immune response in a similar way as it would have done if the original virus would have been injected, and hence the immune response develops in the body. Now we know that China has shared the full sequence of all the strains of coronavirus with the global community. And you will be surprised to know that the virus has been artificially grown outside the China in the labs as well. Then what are we waiting for? What are the challenges which is causing this delay of development of these vaccines? Now there are four main reasons. And the first is that effective development of these vaccines need these labs to grow these viruses in large amounts so that they can do research on the development of the vaccines. But given the current pandemic scenario, these labs are not increasing the production of these viruses, keeping in the safety of the global community. Similarly, since this virus is novel, and that is why its name is novel coronavirus, there is a need to identify the right biological model or the animal on which the first set of vaccines will be tested. And so far, we have not been able to identify that correct biological model which would resemble the human mechanisms precisely. Similarly, after the development of these vaccines, they go through very rigorous regulatory approval procedures throughout the world. And it takes anywhere around 1 to 2 years for that to happen. Now, these three are procedural challenges, but one of the most important challenges is that these viruses are known to mutate very often. Now, one of the most important mutation that coronavirus went through was that it developed the capability of human to human transmission, because earlier it was limited to animals. Now, through rapid mutation, viruses keep on changing their genetic material, and hence the vaccine developed against a virus may not be relevant or even effective after few times because the virus itself has changed. So these are the four important challenges in the development of this new vaccine. Now this discussion becomes extremely important from the perspective of prelims examination, where you would be expected to know the methods through which the vaccines are generated and what are the challenges which are being faced for the development of new vaccine. Let us now move on to the next discussion. This next news item appears on page number 10 in the form of editorial. A pandemic, an economic blow and big fix. Now the outbreak of COVID-19 is slowly turning into economic pandemic from a health pandemic. Economists have pointed out that economic devastation caused due to COVID-19 would be much more painful and longer than health impact. The Chinese economy, which is the epicenter of the outbreak of COVID-19, has registered historically low levels of GDP growth, that is as low as 1.2% in the first quarter of 2020 and 2021. Further, according to the study conducted by Bloomberg Economics, the world economy may face a loss of around $2.7 trillion due to COVID-19. Now, you must have seen the global economic response of COVID-19. A number of countries such as UK, France, Spain, Italy have announced economic packages to deal with this pandemic, whereas UK, Germany, USA have announced various kinds of economic incentives to deal with the economic consequences of coronavirus. For example, in USA, the government is planning economic stimulus package of around $1.8 trillion, which is considered to be highest in its history. Similarly, in case of India, in order to mitigate the impact of coronavirus on Indian economy, PM Modi has set up a task force under the leadership of Union's Finance Minister. Now, this article highlights that unlike other countries, the Indian government has so far not come up with any concrete measures to combat the economic impact of COVID 19. And hence, accordingly, the author suggests a number of recommendations to deal with this economic pandemic. Now, according to the methods suggested by the author, the economic package should rest on these three important pillars, which are addressing the needs of poor and vulnerable, giving out tax cuts and incentives for exports, and at the same time ensuring the enough liquidity in our economy. Let us discuss them one by one. Now, addressing the needs of poor and vulnerable sections, especially in the Indian context, is very important. Considering the fact that informal workforce accounts for almost 90% of India's workforce, the outbreak of COVID 19 may have significant impact on the livelihood of these sections of Indian society. The informal workers, such as agricultural workers, farmers, cab drivers, waiters, mall workers, and in fact, your domestic help may either lose their jobs or incomes due to this pandemic. And hence, there is a need to create an effective safety net for these people. And what is the way which has been suggested by the author? Now, these are not any innovative or novel concepts, and they already exist in Indian framework. Now, one of them is, according to the author, that we need to expand right to work as well as right to food concept in India. For example, integration of Manrega with that of Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana and other schemes programs to build hospitals, clinics and rural roads. Similarly, the excess buffer stock with the Food Corporation of India should be used to provide food grains free of cost to every household in the country. Now, apart from that, author also talks about basic income concept. Now, this is unconditional cash transfer of rupees 3000 a month for a period of 6 months. And according to the author, this should be immediately started given that we have the advantage of jam trinity. Then the author talks about addressing the liquidity crunch, which is very important. Now, you need to understand that the outbreak of coronavirus has a significant impact on the cash flows of several industries such as airlines, hotels, restaurants, travel and transportation, and tourism industry. In response, RBI has been carrying out long-term repo operations and open market operations in order to improve the liquidity situation. But author says that this will not be sufficient. Some of the other measures have been suggested by the author as well, which include recognition of NPA. Now, appropriate changes in the recognition of NPAs of banking sector for a temporary period of time should have to be made. Presently, a loan is categorized as NPA if the principal or interest is due for more than 90 days. Now, according to author, the RBI should come up with new lines extending this 90-day recognition period so that it will give relief to a lot of people who have been badly impacted by the coronavirus. Similarly, author also talks about drastic reduction in interest rates. Now, this will enhance the consumption as well as the investment expenditure. Similarly, author talks about guaranteed credit mechanisms in order to ensure that banks give loans to certain selected cash-starved companies. This mechanism needs to be created. And hence author talks about creation of credit guarantee fund in which when a company defaults on prepayments, money from the credit guarantee fund would be used to repay these loans and hence those banks won't be impacted. Author also talks about tax cuts. Now, according to author, the government should declare tax cuts in order to provide relief to individual companies. Similarly, the incentive for export is very important and hence the government should devise an appropriate incentive scheme for exports and services sectors that have been devastated by the impact of COVID-19. Now, as you can imagine, that creating these mechanisms as well as implementing them will require a lot of funding. The government would be required to spend around 5 to 6 lakh crores. But the question is, from where should the government raise this money considering the fact that its revenues are under severe strain due to higher fiscal deficit and low tax to GDP ratio? And hence, in the editorial itself, the author has come up with 4 solutions. We'll start with discussing reallocation of budgeted capital expenditure. Now you see that the government has budgeted more than 4 lakh crore in the capital expenditure for financial year 2021. Now, some of the capital expenses, such as revival of telecom PSUs, construction of roads and railways, can be delayed for 1 year, looking at the present economic situation. And hence, government should reallocate certain part of capital expenditure for COVID economic recovery package. Similarly, the author talks about the rationalization of current expenditure also. The government must prioritize its expenditure plan and accordingly focus on rationalization of its expenditure. By doing so, according to the author, the government would be able to ensure that it has necessary funds to combat COVID 19. Similarly, you must be aware that there has been a sharp downfall in the global crude oil prices to around $20 a barrel. Now, this has led to a lot of savings for the government and which can range up to 2 lakh crore for this financial year. And according to the author, these savings should be channelized for fighting the coronavirus. And in the last, author talks about that the center and states must come together in the spirit of cooperative federalism and pool in their financial resources and take coordinated efforts to counter this problem. Now, this article is very important because it gives you an insight into how a global health problem has turned into global economic problem. What are the ways in which we can fight it economically and from where to arrange that funding? Now, this discussion is not so much important from the perspective of prelims examination, but it will broaden your horizon as far as development of critical thinking related to mains examination is concerned. Let's now move on to the next article. Now, this article appears on page number 11. Long live the nation. In this article, the author wants to communicate the idea that the COVID 19 pandemic has demonstrated the resilience of nation state as an institution. Because, according to the author, national boundaries have acted as the major barriers for spread of diseases due to travel restrictions. Also, various nation states, that is countries, have been competing in the race to develop vaccine as it is seen as a matter of pride. Also, according to the author, nation state is the only entity which has the legitimate authority in the eyes of its subjects and hence it is best suited to enforce the much needed precautionary measures like social distancing. So, in this regard, it has become important for us to discuss these two key terms, not only because of this article, but also because it is mentioned clearly in the GS1 syllabus. So, we'll first discuss the idea of nations. Now, in very simple word, a nation is a collection of people, but at the same time, it is also different from other groups or communities found in human societies. So, in what ways is the nation different? A nation, to a great extent, is an imagined community. Now, it might shock you, but we'll see how. And the nation is held together by collective beliefs, aspirations, and imaginations of its members. It is based on certain assumptions which people make about collective whole with which they identify. So let us identify and understand some of the assumptions which people make about the nation. Now the first is the shared belief. A nation exists when its members believe that they belong together. And the sense of belongingness comes from the idea of collective identity and vision for the future of a group which aspires to have an independent political existence. Similarly, common history is also very important. People who see themselves as a nation also embody a sense of continuing historical identity. Thus, nationalists in India invoked its ancient civilization and cultural heritage and other achievements to claim that India has had a long and continuing history as a civilization and that this civilizational continuity and unity is the basis of Indian nation. Apart from these two, territory also plays a very key role. Because more often than not, nations identify themselves with a particular territory. Sharing a common past and living together on a particular territory over a long period of time gives people a sense of their collective identity. It helps them to imagine themselves as one people and hence a member of a common nation. Now, apart from these three, two ideas related to politics is very important. Those are shared political ideas and common political identity. So, all these are assumptions which unite people to form a nation. But that is just the first stage. Because when a group of people unite together, they want to govern themselves. And hence, the idea of nation state comes into play. And hence, A nation state is that collection of people which has got the right to govern themselves. Now, to clarify on these confusing concepts, we will take two examples. Now, one is Kurdish community. Now, you know that people belonging to Kurdish community are fragmented into three or four separate countries like Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. But all of them consider themselves to be a member of a common Kurdish nation, and hence they are leading movement of self-determination against each of these countries. Although they are not living together, but they have a collective belief, aspiration, and imagination about a Kurdish nation. So, although that is a nation, but since it has not got the right to self govern, it is not a nation state. So, this discussion is very important from the perspective of mains examination, where you are expected to know the concept of nation and nation state. Let's now move on to the next article. Now, this sad news appears as an editorial on page number 10, The Maoist Trap. Now, this talks about an attack by Maoist extremists in Chhattisgarh's Sukma district that led to the demise of our 17 brave security personnel. Now, in this regard, it is important for us to talk about what Naxalism is, mainly because there is a line in GS3 syllabus which says that linkage between development and extremism. Apart from that, having a deeper insight of Naxalite issue as a whole will give you a better understanding of our overall security scenario, especially in the central and the eastern part of our country. Now, in this regard, it is important to highlight that this issue has been covered in great detail in Daily News Simplified dated 20th of November 2019 by me. In that, we had discussed what Naxalism is, that it is a far left movement which aims to overthrow the Indian state, and it is inspired by the ideology of Marx and Engels on one hand and Mao Zedong on the other. It has its origin in the 1967 Naxalbari, which is in West Bengal. It currently affects around 82 districts which are spread around 11 states in our country. Now, they started with the idea of establishing a utopian society motivated by Marxism, but in reality, their aim is to establish their authority in maximum part of our country. There have been various instances of extortion as well as reports that they are working against the interest of the people by forcing them to align themselves with their ideology. And also, the Indian constitutional framework provides enough freedom that there is a scope for almost all the political ideology, and there is no case for taking up the arms against the Indian state. Also, in the same DNS, we discussed the causes which led to the genesis of such a radical movement in our country. And they dealt with the issues such as Jal, Jungle, Zameen, which are inadequacy of our land reforms, delay in handling over the forest rights, as well as destruction of common property resources. Then issues related to poverty and unemployment were also discussed, and also how the government deficit in delivering the basic amenities in these areas had led to drastic increase in the influence in certain states. We had also discussed the issues related to tri-junction, that the Naxalite movement had earlier been concentrated on the tri-junction of Chhattisgarh, Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. And now there is a report that from this tri-junction, the Naxalite movement is migrating to the tri-junction of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Kerala. Now, as far as state response is concerned, that was also discussed in the same DNS, where it has four components, mainly propaganda, development measures, giving the rights to the local people, as well as security measures. And various legislative and executive measures were also discussed. The main legislative steps are provisions of 5th schedule, implementation of land reforms, PISA 1996, Forest Right Acts, and Prevention of Atrocities Against SC/ST Act 1989. Whereas as far as executive steps are concerned, they are mainly taken by Ministry of Home Affairs, which are modernization of state police, security related expenditures, media plan, mobile connectivity, road requirement plan, and declaration of aspirational districts by Niti Aayog. So it is advisable that you go through the DNS dated 20th of November 2019 to understand the full details of this discussion. Now, this news item on page number 8 is important from the perspective of art and culture. Professionals join hands to digitize over 900 Yakshagana scripts. Now, more than 900 Yakshagana scripts, including the ones printed in 1905 and 1907, have been digitized and made available online for free. and this has been done by a set of volunteers. Now, Yakshagana is an important traditional theatre form of Karnataka, and this has been elaborately discussed by Baswa sir in DNS dated 23rd of February 2020, along with a question which was asked in prelims 2014. Not only that, various other theatre forms of India like Swang, Nach, Jatra, and various others important from the perspective of prelims examination were also discussed by Baswa sir in the same DNS. So it is advisable that you go through DNS, especially given that prelims is around the corner. Let's now solve few questions from the perspective of prelims examination. Folk theatre art forms are very important from the perspective of prelims examination, as UPSC has asked these questions various times. And since today Yakshagana has appeared in the newspaper, we should take this opportunity to learn about few others folk theatre forms as well. So the question says, select the correctly matched folk theatre forms with their states. Statement 1. Yakshagana belongs to Karnataka, which is correct. Jangam Gayan belongs to Haryana, which is also correct. Ramman belongs to Uttarakhand, this is also correct. Whereas Ramnale belongs to Goa and Western Ghats and not to Andhra Pradesh, and hence the right answer is C 1, 2, and 3. Similarly, since we discussed the news related to Naxalism, it is also important to do few map related practice with respect to left wing extremism areas. The question says, consider the following districts often in news due to left wing terrorism. Which of the following are correctly matched with their states? Gadchiroli is located in Maharashtra. Now this statement is correct. The statement 2 says Dantewada is located in Telangana. Now this statement is incorrect as Dantewada is located in Chhattisgarh. Statement 3 says Kerala has no districts which has been declared left-wing extremism affected by Ministry of Home Affairs. And this is also incorrect. Now you might think that this leads us to the right answer A, 1 only. But the question asks which of the statements given above are incorrect. And hence the right answer is B, 2 and 3 are incorrect. So it is important for you to read these questions very carefully. With this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. Now, with this, we have come to the end of today's discussion. It is important for you to follow the government directives very seriously. Practice social distancing. Now, answer for the question of the day of yesterday is B. That is, Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar belong to Golden Triangle. The question for the day for today is which among the following categories of banks are required to follow priority sector lending norms mandated by RBI? Statement 1, commercial banks. Statement 2, regional rural banks. Statement 3, small finance bank. And statement 4, urban cooperative banks.